But this guy we're going to talk about is one of my favorite people who's ever taken up this topic.
Yeah,
Take it away, Jeremy. Yeah.
Yeah, me too, man. I remember, he comes out with these huge series of books. I remember the first time that I got kind of turned on to our guest's work. By the way, it's Richard motherfucking Dolan.
I thought, wow, that was an interesting little thing there. Let's keep going. I started looking for some more USO cases because, I mean, anyone who follows this subject for any length of time knows that the water aspect of this is really interesting. I mean, inherently, it's fascinating. It's like, all right, so it's one thing to see something zigzag in the air. That's really fascinating. That's cool. But to come out of the water, let's just get real here. That's like an extra step of crazy or an extra step of impossible.
So I am a big fan of Richard Dolan. I think his work is awesome. His library, his archives are amazing. And for all the shit that I usually talk, I'm also a big Corbell fan and an even bigger George Knapp fan. So this episode is just one of my most favorite things. We got it starting off with bombastic Jeremy Corbell sensationalism. They're bringing Richard Dolan. But Richard Dolan's been extra feisty this year, 2025, and he's been hitting it hard. Boom, 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 boom. Podcasts. I mean, probably the reason is because he's got his book. It's out. About USOs. I don't even know what USO stands for. They might even say it in this episode. He's been making the rounds. His clips have been making the round. His Twitter posts have been making the rounds about USOs. Unidentified submersible objects. Says he's been working on it for a bunch of years. It seems like he has, but they asked him, was there like a thing? Was there a particular day, a thing that happened that made you, go on this journey and, want to write 3 books about USOs? And he doesn't say, well, it's because I'm a historian, I write books. He doesn't say that. He has a story about a particular case that really got his interest because it didn't seem like there was a lot of cases that had been publicized or talked about a lot that were about USOs, even though there is a lot. So he started looking into it, documenting it, and he ended up with a spreadsheet with like 170 some odd cases that he thought were believable in some form. He's ranked them in lots of different ways. One of those being like the believability or the veracity of the evidence of the case. So not all of them are as good as the others, he says. But he's fired up. He's excited. They ask him questions, but for the most part here, he just kind of goes on in the very beginning about, that question, what made you write this book? The basic answer is that there wasn't a lot of books out there about USOs. There wasn't a lot of hard data, so he went and did that. He went and made the hard data and then wrote a book about it. And actually 3 books. This ended up being so much info. And the cases that he includes in these books, but in his books in general, are, it's just like watching them on YouTube. He kind of tells you a story about a UFO encounter and the people involved, Richard Dolan kind of sticks to, he doesn't stick to it, but he tries to focus mostly on events that have military involved for the most part, because the military keeps records of things. It keeps better records of things in his experience. And so, whenever you're listening to him talk about his books or the data that he's collected, he'll be telling you the methods, the methodology, why he ended up with 170 instead of 3,000, because he threw out, 2,000 of them because he didn't think that they were good enough, and why he did that. And at some point around this halfway point or so is how they kind of like, sort of George Knapp's maybe kind of like the main host for the first half, and then like Jeremy's like the host in the second half. Their little segue is about the illustrations in the book. And then Jeremy, just like in the beginning, wants to kind of get Richard talking about why the water aspect of ufology, of UAPs, UFOs, is significant, is important. And that's what he's doing right here, is he's waning on about the significance of the oceans and why all the different reasons that he can think of, whether they're kind of like insignificant or very significant, that extraterrestrial, or maybe not even extraterrestrials, the aliens, would be hanging out in the water. And even like more so, or primarily, Jeremy kind of lists them off at some point, puts them in a pretty good kind of summary, that maybe water's something that's super available in abundance across the universe, and that's where life goes and is, which kind of seems to be what we've kind of figured out on our own. Also, just humans in general, we've kind of figured out like, oh, water's the thing. It's really cool to see Richard Dolan so excited. He runs through probably, I'll say half a dozen. It might not be really half a dozen, but he probably goes through half a dozen cases, some old ones, some more modern ones. I don't think he actually said that he split the 3 books up for any particular reason. I'm sure, like basically the rest of his material, is he'll sort of run through it as episodes on his podcast. So we'll probably get a lot of these USO cases over the next couple months from Dolan, and that'll be fun. If you're not already a well-versed Dolanite, you should go become one. You don't have to go to his paid part of his website. Just on his YouTube, you'd spend a couple weeks listening to thousands of hours of UFO cases. I like the way that Richard presents them, especially the older ones, because he is a historian and he kind of relies on military documentation. So he's got, witness accounts that he's basically summarizing or even including. Until very recently, there wasn't a lot of pictures and videos to argue about. It was mostly accounts, witness testimony, and sketches, right? People drawing pictures. And then there's basically like some witness testimony and media, newspaper articles, magazine articles, books about other types of physical evidence, right? Like the stuff that they found at Roswell or whatever. Or records. There's just financial records and binders full of HR and staff officers keeping track of things. Just keeping track of people. Who's there, when they're there, how much they're being paid, what they're supposed to be doing. So Weaponized, Jeremy Corbell, George Knapp, with Richard Dolan pushing his new book, Centuries of USO Cases. What are they doing under the waves? At the end here, they basically just say how much they all love each other. They're all good pals. They all love each other a lot. And yeah, like I said, for all the, all the shit talking I do for Corbell, I'm a Corbell guy. I'm a Corbell fan. I'm a George Knapp fan. I'm a Bob Lazar fan. I'm a Richard Dolan fan. And look, here's the fam all together. And this is top level Corbell clan. Richard Dolan's not really in the Corbell camp. He's in what you'd call like the historian camp. Sometimes he kind of floats over into the woo-woo. But as far as his actual work, for the most part, what he's presenting, he's kind of like a nuts and bolts history guy.